Today we're going to talk about dealing with financial uncertainties. I feel like we're in a weird place in the world where there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of changes, and we as humans, we don't deal well with changes, even though it's the one thing that's certain to us. And so I'm just going to talk about 5 different things that we could do to deal with the financial uncertainties that we have coming at us on a daily basis. The first one is create an emergency fund. If you don't already have that in place, you definitely want to have an emergency fund. And an emergency fund is a liquid cash, something that you could access and it's readily available. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to sit in an account earning 0%. You could put it in an account that earns, modest interest rate, but you don't want to expose it to the stock market because then it's subject to fluctuation. You want to put it in an account that earns as decent of interest that you can without being locked in. Just in case something happens, you can access those funds. The recommended amount is usually 3 to 6 months expenses, but depending on your situation and depending on how vulnerable you are to your job or your situation, it might even be much higher. But the first thing you want to do is create an emergency fund if you don't already have that. If you don't have it, then you want to start to consider saving towards that emergency fund. Next thing you want to do is budget and track your expenses. Track where your money is, how it's being spent, what income you have coming in, especially if you don't work a 9 to 5 and you're self-employed. You want to see if the amount you think you're bringing in is actually what is coming in. And sometimes we think we're spending on a certain amount. We think we're spending a certain amount, but when we really track things, we find out that we're spending actually a much higher amount. And so the ability to budget and track those expenses, it gives us the awareness to make the choice of either continue to do what we're doing, if it's quite fine, or make changes if we need to. So the second one is to budget and track your expenses. The next thing to do is diversify your income sources. So if you're only earning from one particular source and you have the ability to diversify that, then you may want to consider that just in case something happens in the future and you lose your one source of income. And especially if it's a substantial part of your income, then that will affect you going forward. So if there are opportunities, you want to see where you could diversify. And if you don't have opportunities, see if you can create those opportunities to diversify your income sources. And this is especially important if you don't have an emergency fund or if you're not making as much as you think you should based on your budget, based on your situation. Another one is reducing debt. That's super important because, of course, that takes away from the income that you have coming in. And if you get put in a vulnerable situation, this debt is going to continue and you will have to pay into it. And of course, if it's high interest debt, you definitely want to tackle that, because if you're affected by some type of emergency, if you lose your job or some type of situation arise and you have to deal with that situation and you don't have the cash flow, then that's going to be problematic, especially if you have a debt that's hanging over your head that you have to pay. So you should revisit what's important to you. A lot of time we strive for certainty as human beings, but as we know, the only thing certain is uncertainty. And the thing that gets us through a lot of this is the clarity, meaning what is important to you? Why are you even making income? Why are you saving beyond the obvious, which is of course the food at your table or have a roof over your head? What's the life you want to live? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to make choices or decisions that is going to change everything tomorrow, but it definitely helps to steer you in the right directions. And sometimes when you're spending, you stop and think, okay, is it important to spend on this, knowing that it's taken away from some future event that you're saving towards? If you know what is important to you and you have clarity about what you're doing and why you're doing it, what typically happens is that it grounds you and it creates that awareness, and that awareness affects your choices, and it's usually a positive effect in that the choices you are now making are choices that are aligned with what's important to you. And so at all times, I think this should be in the center, the forefront. It should be the foundation of everything you're doing. Why am I doing this? Why is it important to do this? Otherwise, we're just making choices without really giving it any thought. And sometimes the decisions we make aren't great. Why? Because we don't have, our mission or why, or we don't have the clarity. We don't want to see what's important to us and why we're doing what we're doing, and why we're doing it, right? So the important thing is at all times, I always tell my clients, the most important thing is to have clarity, about your financial situation. Hopefully this was helpful. I know it's a time that, even if you're in a stable job and things are great, with everything that's happening at a local, national, and a global level, there are many uncertainties, and so sometimes, keeps us up at night, and hopefully, share this information is helpful.